So thank you to everyone. And the session that I'm covering, I've called Leveraging Excellence in Execution in a Post-COVID World. And I'm going to go straight in. So here we go. So work with me for just a moment. On any given day, somewhere in the world, there's a CEO launching a new strategy. And after inside the organization, everyone's heard a rumor. There's a sense of anticipation as they start to come together in the town hall meeting. And as they walk into the room, the CEO goes onto the stage and the music starts to play. And the CEO turns to the audience and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I've invited you here today for the launch of our new strategy. It is a strategy that will be good for you, good for our customers, and good for our stakeholders. But I alone can't make it happen. I need each and every one of you to come together, not just as a department, not just as a team, but as a family. Because only as a family can we make our strategy come alive." And he turns to the audience and says, "Are you with me?" And everyone shouting back, "Yay!" and cheering and clapping. And as the music starts to fade out, two guys at the back of the room go, "What was all that about?" "I don't know, but there's something free to eat outside. Let's go and eat." On any given day, somewhere in the world, there's a CEO launching a new strategy. But after all the fanfare and all the excitement, how many strategies are successfully implemented? And the challenge is, especially around digital, that more digital implementations fail and as many implementations fail as succeed. And what's going to be my pleasure to share with you in this session is the challenges organizations are facing. I've personally been serving the field of strategy implementation for 21 years now. And I first published under my company Bridges in 2002 the first results. And at that time, there was a 90% failure rate in strategy implementation. And then you can see over the last 16 years, 18 years, we've steadily improved until today. Forbes, McKinsey, IBM, and other organizations are all commenting that digital implementation is failing as high as 87% of the time. And it's actually even got a bit worse. So the challenge is, how can we execute at a time when it's becoming even more important, which I'll talk about in a moment. But for those I haven't met before, it's a pleasure and I thank you for joining us. My name is Robin Speculant, and along with Antonio Nieto Rodriguez, we started the Strategy Implementation Institute just January last year. But we're both absolutely delighted with the momentum and the speed of which the Institute is growing. Antonio and I met on the speaking circuit in the Middle East, and from our conversations, we shared a passion to help leaders implement. And out of that passion gave birth to the Institute. And we spent 2.5 years designing, developing the course for strategy implementation professionals. And we then partnered, and Estelle's already joined us from APMG, we partnered to create the examination certification as well. So we're able to offer both the online course and the online certification. And the Institute is about building the community for people passionate about strategy implementation. I live and breathe the subject. I walked away from Citigroup in 2000. I was one of the youngest regional VPs in Asia Pacific. And I became an entrepreneur, which wasn't the buzz it has today, or we didn't have the ecosystem around it. but I now run 3 different companies, including the Institute, something else called the Ticking Clock Guys, which is focused on digital implementation, and my other company, Bridges, which is focused on implementation consulting. Originally from Scotland, but I've lived and worked in New York, London, Sydney, Hong Kong before. Isham, I'll just ask you to hit your mic. Thank you, Isham.
Sorry.
Thank you, Isham. Okay, so I've lived in Singapore now for almost 30 years, been in Asia for over 35 years. Okay. And my challenge in the short time I have with you is to shake up the status quo. Why? Because if we're failing at something so often, we have to think and act differently, which is becoming even more critical as we come out of a post-COVID. It's wonderful that we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's going to mean an acceleration as we've all, as businesses resume, and implementation or execution, the 2 words mean the same thing or synonymous, will become even more important. And implementation is all about doing things a little bit different. So for example, whether you're in a race in Italy and you need to go from last to first place, you can do it with you don't have to reinvent the whole world, just with a little bit of creativity. Or if you're playing American football and everybody's expecting the same thing, you shake things up by doing things just a little bit different, and you can see he scores the touchdown. So I hope to provoke you into thinking a little bit different about the field of implementation. And what I'll focus on in this session is why execution fails, why strategy execution needs to be leveraged, and the value of strategy execution framework. So those are our 3 key topics. So let's go straight in. And I'm going to kick off with a quiz, and this is just to answer on your own. So I've got 6 questions. Here we go. How much of the strategy planning do you have in place before you start implementing? 50, 80, or 100%? Okay. Now, when I'm able to do this in the room and see everyone, typically most people say about 100%, but the actual answer is 80. Why not 100? Because your strategy is never complete. As soon as you start to implement it, things change. So make sure you have the key principles in place and then get started. Number 2, what percentage of people can articulate their organization strategy? 5, 35, or 55%? Okay. And the answer is only 5%. And this is research done by my company Bridges, as well as, for example, Kaplan and Norton, aka the Balanced Scorecard over in the States. My research is more Asia-centric. Both of us find out that most employees don't even know what the strategy is. If they don't know what it is, how can they execute it? What percentage of people know the right actions to take to implement the strategy? 12, 32, or 42%? It's only 12%. It's a horrendous that, even when they know the strategy, they still don't know what to do. And these are some of the biggest challenges we face. What percentage of leaders are good at both crafting and implementing strategy? 8, 24, or 48%? No, it's not B. It's actually A. And this is research that was published in Harvard by Paul, that only 8% of leaders are both good at strategy and its execution. And this is, again, why so many are failing. Penultimate question. This one, 50-50. Business leaders are accountable for technology targets in today's world. True or false? It's true. This is a best practice that when technology and the business now share goals, it creates greater alignment and direction across the organization. And the last question, the average strategy life today. So how long does the average strategy last today? 9 years, 6 years, or 3 years? And the answer is only 3 years. Now, McKinsey reckon it takes 18 months for a large organization to start to get traction on their implementation. So as soon as you're starting to get traction and see some results, which takes 18 months to 2 years, you already have to be thinking about your next strategy. And the name of this session is about leveraging in a post-COVID world. And the reason I use the term leveraging is because the strategic landscape is dramatically shifting around us. For one example, I was chatting with Shanghai today, talking to a company there, and we're talking about just, how rapidly China continues to transform. And you look at 1992, where it was. I will try and mute. Let's see if I can mute everyone. There we go. So you can see the growth of China as an example of the landscape shifting from 92 to 2008, where they reckon, different statistics, but this is the World Bank, predict that by 2024, China will be the largest market in the world on GDP. Another example is that another statement is yesterday's performance no longer guarantees tomorrow's success because strategy life cycles have got so short. Okay? So you have to be thinking and transforming more than ever before. And yet this is the slowest that will ever work because we just continue to get faster. And the focus of the Institute is that we recognize that implementation or execution is going to become even more important because there are going to be more and more strategies being implemented, and the demand for professionals with the right skills is growing. So the clock is ticking on strategy. It's getting shorter and shorter. And some companies say, hey, I haven't even got time for strategy. I just need to experiment. We think of some of the startups or in the tech industry where they just throw things out there and see what works. Right? They don't even have a strategy. They try it, they test it, they move on. So with this strategic landscape dramatically shifting, we need to leverage, because post-COVID, many organizations have less working capital. We know profits are way down, in many industries. So they have less capital, CapEx to invest into new strategies and making them work. Many companies have been forced to rethink their business to generate revenue streams. So they have new business models. Or of course, we know many people have talked around COVID, how, for example, I worked with one of the largest insurance agencies in the world, and overnight they had to go from selling through agents to selling digitally. And literally they had to transform overnight. Or here in Singapore, I lecture at the local university, and of course we went, as everyone else did, from classroom to online learning. So everyone has to be looking at new business models, and digital is no longer an option as we come out of COVID, it's now compulsory for many companies. We're creating new revenue streams within our business. So we're getting creative about how we can generate that and replace the missing revenue. And the challenge for leaders is that we're under greater pressure. And for those of us who, worked through the global financial crisis, or for example, through the internet bubble when it burst, anytime during a crisis, the pressure from the board or from the C-suite puts even more focus on getting things done right the first time, because there's a sense of urgency and there's a shortage of capital. So when things are good, we can cover over the cracks, but when we're stressed, it puts even more pressure to get it right the first time. So the challenge we have is that to this day, leaders still underestimate the whole implementation challenge. What do I mean by that? In so many organizations, they go, great, we've got our strategy. I've done the hard work. Implementation is easy. You guys go and do it. Huh? It's not. Implementation is as tough or tougher than coming up with the right strategy. For one reason, the strategy is the top people in the organization. Implementation or execution is the whole organization. So it takes a lot more focus, dedication, and discipline. Joseph Baller, professor over at Harvard, says, one of the criticisms we have of the strategies of our colleagues who study, our colleagues who study strategy, and even the consultants, is that they assume that once you design the strategy, khalas, it gets done. That's it. It gets executed. They don't look inside the process and realize that it's much more complicated. So we now know, with the research we've been doing, the launch of the Institute, that implementation and execution is much tougher than most leaders anticipate. Donald and Charles Stars are brothers with Stefano and James. I like the quote that I just found from them recently. They said, describing a strategy favors complexity, but executing it requires simplicity. And I thought they framed that very nicely. Strategy can be very complex, but when you're executing it, you've got to make it easy for your people to understand, which I'll talk about later, and easy for them to take the right action. So let's put the focus on implementation. And I got a question. And you'll notice earlier, when the screen changes to dark blue, it's when I have a question for you. So this is one of my favorite ones. If you had to choose, would you prefer to have a good strategy, but it's implemented badly, or B, a bad strategy, but it's implemented well? So just 20 seconds on your own, which would you choose, A or B? Now, I've been fortunate enough pre-COVID days to ask this question around the world, and unbelievably, still to 80% of people say A. And they tell me, why A? If we have a good strategy, Robin, we have the foundation. We're going in the right direction. If it's not working, we'll adjust it. But in fact, the answer is B. Now, why? Why is it better to have a bad strategy that's implemented well? Well, let me explain. What does implemented well mean? It means you have the structure, the systems, the standards. It means you have the tracking, the guidance, you have the performance all happening. You have the communication, people with the right skills. And when the strategy is not working, and here's the key message, Now you might go, You can have a good strategy, but if it's implemented badly, you don't know how well it's doing. But if you're good at implementation or execution, you know how to track. And then if it's not working, you have the discipline to go back upstream and make the changes. Also consider, nobody goes into the boardroom saying, Okay, guys, let's come up with a bad strategy today. Everyone thinks they have a good strategy. So you need to know, you can only tell how good it is when you start to execute it. Now, don't get too hung up on this. It's a bit of a warm-up question. Obviously, success comes from having both a winning strategy and excellence in execution. And one of the companies that I admire is IKEA. Because IKEA, well, they've had more or less the same business model for 60 years. Everybody knows it. And yet they have no global competitor. At a time when we say markets are shrinking, a guy in a garage can copy you tomorrow. But here's IKEA. Everybody knows them, and they continue to expand and dominate and have almost a monopoly on the global market. Why? Because not only are they good at their strategy, but they're excellent at the execution. So, for example, when they go into a new country, such as India 2 years ago, they spend 4 to 5 years making sure they know all the details, the habits, the personal things about what people do. So in India, DIY, do it yourself, is not popular. So what's different in IKEA for India and for China, because it's the same, when you check out, you have the option of a handyman coming to your home to help you assemble the table. Now you might go, oh, that's easy. But Home Depot, an American company, went into China about 10 years ago, spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, building Home Depots across China, because Home Depot sells the things you need to build things yourself. And they failed because they hadn't understood the culture within China. But IKEA does their homework and then executes it very well. And a bit of fun, I asked one person, when you think of IKEA, what do you think of? And the person said, meatballs. Or this one. So, unbelievably, most organizations are poor at creating strategy and even worse at implementation. And that's not just my view. I had the pleasure of, I've heard Professor Michael Porter, like the guru of strategy, talk a few times. And last time I heard him in Dubai before COVID, he was saying still companies are bad at crafting strategy. And I add on to that, they're even worse at the implementation. And the challenge we have across the world is that all of us who did a business degree, and I did my MBA here in Singapore, is that leaders have been taught how to plan, but not how to implement. We all have a course and module on strategy, but none of us were taught implementation. And change management, which some of us did, is different to implementation, which I'll talk about shortly. So either, using your mic or in the chat room, just give me some suggestions. Why does, execution/implementation fail so frequently? What do you reckon? Stella, thank you. Lack of communication, absolutely. Thank you, Shingo. No framework, spot on. Shingo-san, thank you. Poor leadership, yeah, unclear benefits. Now, if we were, doing a workshop, we could sit down and go into breakouts, but we don't need to. Here's the scary thing. No plan, thank you, Sham, yep. People know why implementation fails. I've asked this question again to leaders all over the world on numerous occasions, and they'll tell me the same things. Poor communication, lack of measurement, no understanding, no commitment from the top. So here's the $6 million question. If leaders know why it's failing, why does it keep failing? Well, it's a rhetorical question, so let me answer it. Here's the story of strategy implementation so far. good business practice is to have a vision, mission, and values. Then we add the strategy, which is how we're going to deliver the vision or where we differentiate from the competition. Then we apply the change management, and this gives us the results. Taman, is okay? No. This is what we've always done. And of course, if we always done what we've always done, we always get what we always got. So my passion is studying successful companies in implementation. And prior to 2016, I published 3 books specific on the field of execution. And in the last 4 years, I've actually published 3 books on digital execution. Little advert that the world's best bank is coming out on June the 1st. And from my research, the work I do with organizations, so for example, the world's best bank is a bank in Singapore called DBS, and they've constantly been voted the world's best, and they did it over the last few years. So I worked with them and I studied them as well as many other companies, and here's what I discovered. Absolutely, you need a vision, mission, and values. You know, ever since Built to Last was published in the late 90s by Paris and Collins, you know, we've established that as a best practice. Of course, you have to create the strategy. But what I discovered is the successful companies go beyond traditional change management. Change management is a subset of strategy execution. I'll say that again. Change management is a subset of strategy execution. And it doesn't work for rolling out corporate-wide strategy. How can I say that? Because we constantly fail. So we need to do something different. And that's into the world of implementation with one very important message. So in a few minutes, I'll go to the second part of the presentation. I'll introduce the framework, but I want to, if nothing else from this presentation, hopefully you'll remember this. My personal definition of strategy is about making the right choices. Tells you, should we go cross-border? Should we be using ecosystem platforms? Should we be developing new products? It helps you make the choices of what you should and should not do. So strategy is about making the right choices. What is execution all about? So execution is about taking the right actions. Now remember, only 5% of employees know what the organizational strategy is. And of those 5%, only about 12%, so hardly anyone knows what to do. So we need to encourage people to take the right actions. And the emphasis is on the word right. We're all busy every day, but are we contributing to the long-term value of the business? And it takes discipline. Consider how many people make New Year's Eve resolutions, and within the first 2-3 months of the year, they've gone out the window. Or another stat, how many doctors smoke? 44% of doctors around the world smoke. Now, these are people who spend their life, you know, telling you the problem of smoking, and yet they don't have the discipline to practice what they preach. So taking the right action needs discipline. And the framework that we call the Strategy Implementation Roadmap in the Institute guides you through. And this was put together. Antonio, my partner, was chairman of Project Management Institute, and I'm one of the leading thinkers around strategy implementation for the last 20 years. And together, we put together this roadmap to guide organizations. And also, just as a side note, this makes up the modules that we offer on the online course. So for the last part of the presentation, I'm just going to share with you some key thoughts under each area. and only one message under leadership. So leadership excellence is we know leaders have to be engaged. We know one of the top reasons execution fails is because leaders say it's important, but they don't follow through on it. But the major shift that's happening in execution today or implementation is that we're now much more driven from the bottom than just top down. Now, in the past, most strategies were all dependent on the leaders driving it top down. But why is it bottom up today? Well, let me give you an example. Many companies are adopting digital. To implement digital, you have to start activities such as hackathons, customer journey mapping, design thinking, data analytics. Who's doing the work on that? The employees at the front. And they change the way the organization is working to improve it for the customer and feed up those changes. And one of the CEOs, actually CEO of the DBS bank who I worked with, summed it up very astutely for me. He said, Robin, I used to go to meetings to tell people what to do. Now I go to meetings to hear what is happening in my company. So now leaders have to let go that they know everything. And they have to drive and inspire people throughout the journey of the execution. The financial value. When you execute your strategy right, because so many others fail, the payoff is tremendous. But when you get it wrong, it's a heavy cost. There was a seminal article and research done by Mankins and Steele. They declared that on average, companies deliver only 63% of their financial performance from their strategy promise. Another research said that failing at implementation can cost you up to 50% of your cumulative cash flow. This comes from CEB. And this is a time when our cash flows are limited. And the third and final one is poor performance results in organizations losing 109 million for every $1 billion invested in projects, according to the PMI. But on the reverse side, when you get it right, CEB also explains that you estimate get a 39% better return on your investments. Organizations who execute well will have higher employee engagement with a 19% increase in operating income and a 28% growth in earnings per share, as done by Watson. And in the same article, Mankins and Steele said, they also stated if leaders realize their full potential of the strategy, they increase the value, they can close that gap from 60 to 100%. And we all know today, we look at, the companies leading the way, the Amazons, the Alibaba, the Spotifys of the world, when you execute right, everybody, the payoff is tremendous. Moving round our roadmap, and sorry, I should have said, for every of the blocks, we have 4 stages. So crafting, embedding, executing, and sustaining. Okay. And for example, on the course that we operate, it takes you through each of these steps, crafting, embedding, executing, sustaining for each of the modules and explains what needs to happen. So what's the key message under business model? I thought I'd have some fun with this one. Business models are changing. So for example, we no longer talk about customer service. The new language today, post-COVID, is customer obsession. We now have the tools to really drill down to be obsessed about our customers. We can track using data analytics every step of a customer's journey, especially easier when you're using digital. We no longer talk about creativity. The new language is design thinking. So many people refer to the Stanford model, but there's many others that you use. But the whole point here is, design thinking is the latest. approach to us really becoming designing our platforms rather than just products around the customer. Measurement, of course, has become data analytics. Massive amount of data, but it's not what, having a lot of data. It's about recognizing the small data that's important among the big data. Process management has become RPA, robotic process automation. RPA works well when you have lots of people doing similar work, like in operations or accounts. So RPAs are very popular. Post-COVID, organizational transformation has become business model disruption. And finally, because you got to have a bit of fun, people have become robots. Now, I speak at a lot of conferences and a lot on digital, and one of the most most frequent questions is, am I going to lose my job? When I studied the top 10 digital transformations of the last decade, 9 out of 10 had all grown. So, for example, the bank in Singapore, when it started its digital journey, it had 22,000 people. Today, it has 29,000. So, am I going to lose my job? If you don't make yourself relevant for the new world, yes. Make yourself relevant? No. And the challenge for companies today under the business is you've got to innovate or eliminate. You've got to be more agile, more lean, more quicker. Your cadence has to be much faster. So you've got to innovate new ways of working and eliminate what doesn't work anymore. Stakeholder management. Looking at the people who are involved and getting them on board. Going to share a couple of tips with you. First of all, when you share the new strategy, you have to do it both emotionally from the heart and logically from the mind. So what this means is some people are more left brain, some people are more right brain, and you have to appeal to both groups. Now, I mentioned already that 12% of employees know the right actions to take. Only 5 really understand the whole strategy. So the goal is to share with them. But the sharing is only 15% of your overall communications. 25% is the role of leaders to guide them through what needs to be done. 10% of the communications is inspiring, because we all know what to do, but doing it takes inspiration. But look at the biggest block here, the 50%. For some reason, companies stop communicating the execution of the strategy. You have to constantly update what's working, what's not working, sharing best practices, feedback from customers, feedback from internal, how we're doing against our objectives, what's changing. There's so much to share, and yet people just stop sharing. And a lot of the time, companies only focus on sharing the strategy. And this is a big problem that we still have today. 2 more tools to share with you. This is a tool that I use called Strategy on a Page. I'm actually working with a client right now, creating it for them. Strategy used to be given to you on your first day in the office. It was a big folder, many pages you had to read. Employees don't read that. So now we use visual, because the brain understands visual 60,000 times faster than text. So this, for example, is the one at DBS, where the whole strategy is on one picture. Now, obviously, it's the highlights, but it showed the name of the strategy, Making Banking Joyful. Now, banking's not joyful, but this was the whole point. The leaders recognized that people don't wake up in the morning wanting to do banking. So technology gave the bank the opportunity to take the pain out of banking and make it easy and even joyful. And then the picture explains how they were going to do it. Another tool that I use with different companies is strategic teasers. So you tease people about what's coming. So I'm going to share an example from Microsoft. When Microsoft launched its channel partner experience, CPE, I was working with the head of the strategy in Asia Pacific, and this poster went up. It was a few years back before sustainability, and this poster went up in all the back offices of Microsoft in Asia Pacific. And all it said is, we're flying high today, but see the clouds on the horizon. The second poster a few weeks later went up saying, are we losing our grip? And the third poster said, it's taken, it's a long way up, but it only takes a second to fall. Now, what happened was we created a groundswell of curiosity. And then a few weeks later, we launched the global strategy on Microsoft, which was to improve the partnership, the go-to-market through the channels. And then we went into detail what it was about. What was the difference? In Asia Pacific, we started 9 months after Seattle, where head office is, but within only a few months, we were already overtaking them. Why? Because we teased people into it. They saw the problem before we got going. And the teaser is a great way to get curiosity and interest in the strategy. Moving around the roadmap, culture evolution. So a couple of key messages around culture. The most important is that culture drives the way you execute. Two companies can have the same strategy. How they implement it, how they execute it, is based on their culture. So for example, Alibaba, Amazon, they used to be compared, that they were both doing deliveries, but they have very different business models. Amazon depends on building warehouses for delivery. Alibaba depends on building servers, just as one example. Here's another one. Singapore Airlines and United. Singapore Airlines, very standard, very structured. United, not so much. You might remember this incident a couple of years ago where they dragged Dr. Dow, one of the passengers, literally, you can see him physically being dragged off a plane. The culture dictates how you execute. In United, what kind of culture is it that allows you to drag physically a customer off a plane? Dr. Dow actually received $140 million in injuries. So, I would have done that for $140 million. But here's the interesting. What happened was an algorithm predicted that Dr. Dow would be the least expensive passenger to bump off the flight. And that's how he was selected. Now, the comparison here is that culture drives the way you execute. So moving round to employee engagement. Most people today, we feel overworked, overstressed. And the challenge we have is the caliber of the people in the room dictates the caliber of the execution. So you have a responsibility to train your people up, especially in a digital world where so many new skills are required. But it's those caliber of the people making the decisions that dictates how successful you are. And they've got to be inspired. One of my mottos, small actions by lots of people equals big change. So it's not about getting them to take giant leaps. It's about getting lots of people to make small changes. And this is tough because only 1 in 5 people feel positive about adopting a new strategy. And finally, tracking performance. Unbelievably, companies don't change their measures. What do I mean? Well, the message is change your strategy. You have to change your measures. If not, you're still measuring your old strategy. And what you measure is, again, what you get. So you got to change the measures to reflect your new strategy. And just a couple of key tips. Avoid vanity measures. Vanity measures are like how many people visit your Facebook or how many likes you get on LinkedIn. They're vanity. They make you feel good, but they mean nothing to the business. What's more important is how many leads did you generate from your investment on advertising on LinkedIn or Facebook. And the key message here is pay attention to the vital few, ignore the trivial many. With so much data around, you have to identify what is important for the whole organization to track at a senior level. I've been a fan of the balanced scorecard since it came out in the mid-90s. I run it with many different organizations. I'm not going to go into it in this session, but my recommendation is use the balanced scorecard to this day is still one of the best tools, and it's recently just been updated to include sustainability and ESG. So I appreciate we started late because of the issue with the login. So I'm just going to give you just a minute on your own. When you read a book, attend a webinar, hear a keynote, if you make one small change, then it's a success. So could you just take a minute on your own and reflect, what was the key takeaway for yourself from what I've just presented? And then I'll go to the closing couple of slides. So just 1 minute, what is your own personal key takeaway? And what will you do differently as a result tomorrow? Okay, so let me just close out. Half an hour after I finish, you'll have forgotten half of what I said, according to American Institutes of Research. So for those who are more interested in the field of implementation, the Institute is, online. It's a self-learning. It's 30 hours of learning over 12 weeks. And then you can choose to be certified. To support people during these tougher times, we've discounted the course. And if you take the course, the membership is free for 12 months. And you can do the course and then choose to be certified. And our most popular is the bundle offer that gives you free 12 months membership, access to the course for 12 weeks, and the certification, which is just $700 US. So my apologies, implementation never goes according to plan. My apologies for the mix-up on LinkedIn with the issue and the connection. Thank you for those who attended. You've got me on LinkedIn. Please post any questions, any feedback, any comments. You can scan my QR code here. It gives you access to all my different fields and area. And I look forward to meeting you online and then eventually post-COVID world, getting to meet you in person. Thank you to everyone for attending. Have a wonderful day ahead.